Hi everyone, welcome to Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I've had 2 home births in April 2020 and in June 2023. I'm a mental health nurse and an ex-student midwife that has a strong passion for birth and supporting women. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm recording on in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. I would also like to acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been birthing at home on country for tens of thousands of years prior to the British invasion and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Wow, this is episode 10. 10 feels like a milestone, and I am so excited to have 10 more birth at home stories shared with the world to inspire, motivate, and empower other women. Episode 10 is also a double home birth story from Meredith, who has had a home birth in Australia with Audie and a home birth in New Zealand with baby Etta with the support of her partner Matt. It was so interesting to listen to Meredith tell her stories, and she mentioned so many awesome topics and resources that I've put in the episode description. Before we jump into the episode, if you're enjoying the podcast, please rate or review it, as it really helps it to be found in the sea of other podcasts out there, and it means so much to me. Enjoy. Welcome, Meredith, to the Birthing at Home, a podcast.
Thank you. So excited to be here, and I've got my little Etta sidekick. Giggles.
For the listeners who obviously cannot see, I usually don't do video, but today we're going to try video because baby Etta is really fascinated with looking at whatever she can see through the video.
She's really fascinated, isn't she?
Yeah. And Meredith, you're in New Zealand, right?
I am, yeah. So we live in Queenstown now. So Etta is, New Zealander by birth, which is a bit odd for me as an Australian, but and my eldest Audie was born in Sydney just over 2 years ago. So Etta's 4 months and Audie's just over 2 years and 4 months.
Yeah. And why are you in New Zealand?
A few reasons. Matt's parents live here, and we also met in the mountains and in Whistler, and we have kind of always wanted to move back to the mountains in New Zealand. It was a bit closer than Canada to Australia. And living in Sydney, even though we're both Australian, we didn't really have much family there, so kind of nice to move somewhere close to family that we could so here we've got grandparents for the kids, which is really nice. Though they travel a lot, so way more than we do. So they're living up the retired life, which is great. But both of our works, I transferred over with work, and Matt could work remotely.
Cool.
So we just.
What do you both do for work?
He's a software developer, and I work in sustainability for Woolworths, Countdown/Woolworths. Yeah, so we're large supermarkets in both countries. So I managed to transfer, and he can work remotely. So we thought, why not give it a shot? We'd planned to move, and then found out I was pregnant, because we found out I was pregnant at 10 weeks with Etta.
Yeah.
And I started my job a week after I found out I was pregnant, and so I was like, oh no, this is really awkward timing. So it was pretty back and forth at first whether we'd actually move, but we're here now.
Yeah, amazing. So you had how did you say your other child's name?
Audie, Audie.
Audie. So you had Audie in Sydney.
Audie was born in Sydney. She was also a home birth, so they're both born at home. And both are kind of like, what's the word? Like uninteresting in many ways, like from the surface, because there's nothing really went wrong.
That's how births should be.
Yeah, so perfect. Yeah, so perfect. And, felt really lucky with both of them.
Yeah, amazing. Do you want to give a little overview? I guess actually first I should ask, before you had Audie, because it's like we have discussed before on Instagram. It's quite unusual in our society today to have a home birth for your first birth. So prior to having Audie, did you know about home birth?
I think a little bit. So, like, years ago, I worked with a woman who had a home birth in Canada. And I think, like, I thought at the time, like, oh, gosh, that's messy and, like, complicated and, like, why would you do that? But kind of cool at the same time.
Yeah.
But I thought it was, like, a bit hippie. And she was giving us all the chats. And I think I knew about it, but I think it's like I didn't know anyone other than her who'd ever had a home birth. So it was quite like a bit out there. And then before we got pregnant and when I first got pregnant, I was doing lots and lots of reading. I'm like an avid researcher. And one of the books that I read was Babies Are Not Pizzas. They're born not delivered. It's by the woman who runs Evidence-Based Birth, Rebecca Decker. And I think that was maybe like the third book or so that I'd read. But like it obviously was like, you know, that idea of like you need to have heard something a few times before it like sinks in. But she ended up having a home birth as one of her later birth, I think her second birth. And I remember being like, oh, yeah, well, like she's really analytical and evidence-based and it made sense for her. And so that was kind of one idea that planted the seed. And then the other thing is from that book I knew that I wanted continuity of care somehow, particularly a midwife if possible. But I was excluded from the local MGP for having pre-eclampsia risk. So had an appointment with them and they basically said, look, you're probably not going to be able to be on the MGP. Like we'll just wait for this second test result to come back. And had also connected with a doula. And she'd had a second birth at home and she was like, have you thought about home birth? And I was like, kind of, but like I was hoping for MGP or, you know, a birth centre, but birth centres don't really exist in Australia. They're like few and far between. So there was a couple of seeds planted and then in the same week I had an MGP appointment and I met my private midwife, like just to like sound out the idea. And I'm rhesus negative of a blood type. And I just remember like the two appointments, like it was chalk and cheese how they managed it. Like, so the MGP, they were like, all right, sign this form, you're going to get anti-D at this many weeks and this many weeks and postpartum and that's what we do. And, you know, that's it. That's like, there's no, kind of like presented it perfectly fine, but with no choice. And then I remember my midwife saying, well, what blood type is Matt, my husband? And I was like, oh, I'm not sure. She's like, if he's also negative, there's no way you can make a positive baby and you don't need anti-D. I mean, there's all this science that goes on behind like blood types, which I don't fully understand. But
I think Dr. Sarah Wickham, I think, has like a really good resource about anti-D. I'll put that in the show notes. I've listened to the podcast of it on Midwives Cauldron, but I can't quite remember.
It's pretty complicated. I think the simplistic part of it that I understand is like if you're both negative, there's no way you can make a positive blooded baby, rhesus positive baby. But so he went and got a blood test and he was negative. He was positive, sorry. So it meant that there was a possibility that the baby would be positive, and then that creates antibodies that affects future pregnancy. So it doesn't even affect the current pregnancy. But anyway, my private midwife had presented this as like, look, there's like science around this, like, it's not just straightforward. The hospital won't tell you that because in case there's a chance that the baby isn't your husband's. Actually,
isn't that like mad?
Yeah.
Like that is so sexist.
Why not ask me? Like he wasn't in the appointment. Say like, is there a possibility that he's not the father? And if so, then you could have a positive baby. But but it's like, you know, and once we knew that his blood type was positive, we were like, oh well, that's a different scenario. But if he'd been negative and I knew that it was his baby, then like it's unnecessary intervention, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, that was with the suggestion of Kath, our doula, and then having had this meeting with Chantel, I kind of knew straight away that I had already seen like the writing on the wall, I guess, of and already knowing that I wanted continuity of care. And then the further along that we got, we watched Homebirths New South Wales Q&A, which answered all the questions like, what about the neighbours? You know, how much does the birth pool weigh? And like, will it ruin my floors? What about the hot water system? Like all of the stuff that's like really logical and that you kind of need to know, but like it plays on your mind if you don't know. So that helped both Matt and I. And then Matt and I had a few appointments with our doula, and she was just amazing. She'd stay for a couple of hours and just answer all our questions. So
wow.
So that really helped.
What kind of led you to hiring a doula, do you think? Because that's also, I feel, kind of not common, especially for first-time mums.
Yeah, I think it was the same thing of like knowing that the positive outcomes of continuity of care, and that doulas, if in a system that's fragmented, can fill in that gap. And so originally when I kind of thought I was having like MGP or, midwifery care through the hospital, possibly the doula would help, like a doula would help fill that gap. But then, when we got further down the track and we were like, oh, we're having a private midwife and a doula, it felt like a bit, I don't know, what's the word, like really like luxurious, having all these people like there to support us, and a bit like they really overlap as well in home birth. Like there's a lot of TLC that a private midwife provides that is similar to what a doula provides in many ways, but then there's quite different, like big difference as well. Like obviously a midwife is medical, and and Kath, there were things like I could have more of those kind of emotional discussions with Kath and spiritual, or not spiritual exactly, but that moving into that transformation that is birth.
Yeah, absolutely. I also found with my 2 home births, like I had private midwives, like that work in a business, I guess, like private midwives, and a practice. That's the word I'm trying to look for.
Right.
And like the demands on private midwives are so high right now that they give you the time, and like so much more time than you would ever get in a medical kind of system. But I've never had a doula, but my understanding is like the doula, like you might be her only woman, really. So like the amount of time she has, the space that she, or he, I guess, has to give or like share with you is so much more than a midwife that might have, I don't know, 5, 6, 10, I don't know how many like pregnant women at one midwife takes on. So
and I think and I think midwives also have like that extra layer of like kind of paperwork and all their registration and all of that stuff that like is always playing in the back of their mind, and that in some ways doulas are a bit free from that and can really understand what is driving you. And I don't know, it's different. I mean, I think it was probably like, it was so wonderful having both of them, and they both did different things, definitely, but it did feel a little excessive at times, but it was like it was so wonderful. But that's where it came about. It was like originally not thinking I'd have my own midwife necessarily. That was trying to fill that gap, and knowing that was like the evidence said that was kind of the best outcomes. Hey, Papa. And she also taught hypnobirthing, so we did her course as well when I was pregnant. Dragged Matt along on Valentine's Day.
Excellent.
You're so chatty.
Hey, Etta. Hi. And was that like a weekend course, or how long did that?
Yeah, it was two Sundays. So I think it started on Valentine's Day, and then it was the week after as well. So I think I was the least pregnant. I think I was like so keen to do it. We did it when I was like 20 weeks pregnant or something, like so soon. I was like, that was like, you're the least pregnant person. But it was, that, is my kind of vibe of.
Yeah. And what did Matt kind of think about home birth? Did he know about it? Like, what were his thoughts, do you think? On that, Etta?
Oh, Baba.
Newborn life, it's okay. I'm there with you.
Yeah, I know. Good little vomit. I eat too much milk. I think he was like, cautious. He'd done less reading and research than I had. But yeah, he was open to it and open to kind of understanding more about it. And then, I think he met with Chantel at that first kind of meet and greet just over Zoom that we had, and then we discussed it with Kath and we watched the home birth Q&A. So he I guess he'd done less research, so it took a little bit longer in the journey. But I think, I don't know, I've kind of found that's like there's always this delay of like about 3 to 6 months of everything, like parenting related, like they don't get pregnant, like the guys don't get pregnant. So
true.
Or the partner, not always a guy. So I think there's just like this little bit of like catch up, and I think it was the same. But yeah, he was on board, and then like now he's a huge advocate for it, and just doesn't understand, like, he's like me and thinks it's amazing, and that and that it makes sense. I mean, other than the fact that he runs around crazy setting up pools and then taking down pools and cleaning and all of that stuff. So that's actually quite an ask on him. But I think like he's definitely seen the magic that is home birth.
Yeah, and the magic, absolutely. So did you work through Audie's pregnancy? Yeah. And when did you finish up work?
Yeah, so I finished up at 38 and 4, and I know that because I gave birth at 38. Oh no, 38 and 3 was my last day because I gave birth 38 and 5. So I had one day, and I actually was meant to work that Friday, and I was like, no, I'm so sick of this. Like, it was so stressful the last week, especially. Like, my manager had left the company, a colleague had gone on maternity leave. Like, I was meant to be moving into another team, and there was just like all of this stuff happening, and I was like, I'm not working that Friday. And I was so glad I didn't, because she my waters broke at midnight, like that. I had one day of doing
of maternity leave. And so up until 38 plus 3, obviously you had the rhesus negative stuff and like the pre-eclampsia risk. Did you have to do any extra, or I mean, you don't have to do anything, but like, did you choose to do extra checks or things around that? Or
well, interestingly, my private midwife had like just prior to me, she'd had a birth where the woman had to transfer to hospital, and she'd gone to a hospital that she wasn't licensed to be able to go as a midwife. So she one of the provisos of going with her with my like 1 in 17 risk of preeclampsia was to have an obstetrician that operates out of Westmead. So I think a lot of the Sydney home birth midwives or private midwives are connected into one or two of the obstetricians at Westmead because they're quite open to working with them as kind of that fallback in case you need to transfer. So I had that, and so I had some extra scans along the way because of that, and a couple of obstetrician appointments as well, and didn't need her assistance at all in the end. But it was, I guess it was like knowing that I was relatively high risk, that at the end of my pregnancy I could have that kind of hypertension and possibly needing to be induced, that we had that kind of fallback, that I'd still be able to have my midwife and that continuity, and that we just go to Westmead. So I had all of these plans. I had like plan A was like stay at home. plan B was like if we had time, we'd go to Westmead, but Westmead, like we were living in Freshwater, so Westmead could be an hour and a half drive if you got really bad traffic.
Wow.
And I mean, it's probably not normally that far, but and then like plan C, I guess, is like if we really needed to transfer soon, we'd go up the road to Northern Beaches Hospital. So
okay. Okay. And so how did you spend that one day?
From memory,
I hope it was relaxing.
Yeah, I think I went and bought some plants that never got planted, so I think most of them like died because they like once baby was there, I was like, oh, like I don't really have the energy to plant.
I don't need more babies.
Yeah, exactly. I had a burrito from my favorite burrito place with a friend. It was a bit of a rainy, grey day from memory. I probably went for a swim because I did a lot of ocean swimming.
Cool.
I'm pretty sure I went for a swim that day, and I had plans to swim the next day, but then my waters broke, and I didn't want to kind of risk infection, so I sent the group saying like, oh, I'm not feeling great, or I didn't sleep well or something, some excuse. And it turns out they baked me a cake. It was like half pink and half blue because we didn't know what we were like when we were having a girl. And I was like, oh, damn it, I missed out on the cake. And then once they knew later that I like gave birth, they were like, oh, that's a pretty good excuse to swim.
Oh, that's so sweet. Had you felt like any signs of labour in the lead up to that 38?
Yeah, I'd had like Braxton Hicks on and off for a couple of weeks, and like I think probably if I'd finished work earlier in some ways I might have given birth earlier because I was just like pretty stressed with work, so like I don't think my body had like calmed down enough to give birth. But I'd been having Braxton Hicks weeks, so that was also one thing where I was like, oh, it still could be, I don't know how long it could be, you know, and my waters broke first, and I remember calling my doula and midwife and being like, we're having a baby, and they're like, oh, just like expect it could be a marathon, you know, like it could be 4 or 5 days, you know, like really like putting in my head that like don't think you're about to have a baby like any minute.
Was it like quite a because you said it was like at midnight, right?
Yeah,
was it quite a gush, or like was it a bit of a trickle, or?
Yeah, it was a bit of a trickle, but kind of like noticeable that it was not just one off, like it was just like little bits of trickle kind of from then until the morning. And when I spoke to my midwife, she was like, we're like, oh, we're just going to go out for breakfast and like do a couple of errands and stuff. She was like, wear your Depends because your baby's head acts like a plug, and like it could just move at 1 minute and then like you've got water everywhere. She's like, learn from me, wear the adult undies. Like so that was good advice.
And did you have like any concerns, you know, with your waters breaking and your labour not like starting like imminently? Did you have any concerns about like this infection risk that they talk of, or were you kind of just accepting that it's going to happen when it happens and it's okay?
I was pretty comfortable that like, you know, almost all labours kick off at some point, you know, in the following days from your waters breaking. So I kind of wasn't too worried about that. I was like mindful of the infection risk, like which is why I didn't go swimming in the ocean. I just thought that was so like you
took like logical like precautions.
It
makes sense.
Didn't do that, but otherwise wasn't like particularly worried. And I remember my midwife being like, all right, so you got to just, you know, keep an eye on the colour of your waters, check for fever, check your temperature and whatever. So I think I checked my temperature once and I was like, yeah, okay, cool, normal. And then like 4 hours later I checked it again and remember thinking like, I don't understand what this number means in relation to like whether I have a fever or not. Like I was well and truly into labour land and my brain wasn't I couldn't do the analysis of like what does this number actually mean. And I'm an engineer by training, so for me I was like, that's just so bizarre, but it's just like shows you how much those hormones take over, right? And
so how many hours was it until like I guess you would consider yourself in labour from when your waters broke?
Yeah, so my waters broke at midnight, and then probably I think I got up about 8. I think we kind of slept in a little bit, and we went and had breakfast, and then I came back and had a nap and sent Matt out to get like supplies for a soup that I thought I was going to cook that afternoon. And then I think it was probably about 4:30. Like a friend came over to help Matt because we had also just moved house, and we hadn't cleared out the spare room, which is where we were going to set up the pool and all of it crazy. And so it was about 4:30 when I was like, "There's a baby coming today," and that was when I like knew for sure that things were on. And she was born at 9 p.m. 9:01.
Yeah.
So I don't actually can't do the math. I'm not that.
No, whatever maths that is. Yeah. I'm
so
terrible at math.
It wasn't a full day in the end. Like
Yeah. And I guess, do you want to take us through the birth of Audie?
Yeah. I stayed, like, after we went out and did some errands and had breakfast, came back and I had a snooze, and then like drew up all the curtains and the blinds and was like, I just need, like, I can't deal with the sunlight. And ordered some food and had some food. But just was like, I was like kind of dancing around with, Elton John and like some fun music like that, clearing out the spare room. Just kind of really getting into it. My doula Kath dropped off a TENS machine. I think it was about 2 in the afternoon, and she was like, "This will really help." And I was like, I didn't think things were happening like that day. I was like still in denial. But I popped it on, and I was like, "Oh, this feels great. Yeah, cool. I'm going with this." Spent a lot of time labouring in like on our bed, like resting over a couple of pillows with my butt in the air, and. In hindsight, and like knowing that my waters broke early and looking at her head when she was born, I think she was posterior for my labour, which makes sense of me wanting to be in that position, because I think that was kind of helping her pull out a little bit and drop back down. In a kind of nicer spot, because I actually tried that position with Etta and I was like, oh, this feels horrible. How did I spend so much time?
Yeah.
So it's just so funny how like, something... that feels great. One time just doesn't the other. So just laboured kind of in the bedroom for a while, for most of it. Went back and forth to the bathroom. I remember calling Kath, my doula, and saying like, I just like, I don't know, I just like feel like I need something else. Like what, give me a suggestion. And she was like, try and do 10 hip tilts, like, so with your back flat against the wall and kind of tilt as you're standing up, and like try that for 10 contractions or 10 times, whatever. And I remember doing that and being like, oh wow, something happened that like I like had a huge release of waters, and she'd like obviously just kind of like nestled her way down. That was in the bathroom, and that was probably like getting close to the time where I was like, oh, I think that, things are really happening. And then I moved back into the bedroom and had like another contraction or two, and then felt like pushy, like this reverse vomiting. And I was like, whoa, what was that? Like really took me by surprise that was happening. And I remember calling Kath, my doula, and Chantel, my midwife, and being like, oh my gosh, I think I'm pushing. They're like, okay. Oh, like, and both of them were like an hour away. Like they weren't close. They're like, all right, just see how it goes. Like, see how you're feeling. And I remember Kath saying like, you can, if you want, you can reach inside and feel how close your baby is. And I remember doing that, and she's like, okay, how far? And I was like, how many knuckles, I think she said. And I was like, oh, just over 1 knuckle. And she's like, oh, okay. Like very calmly was like, okay, yeah, you're doing great. And then I think behind the scenes she was like calling Matt and being like, I'm on my way. Like not stressing me out, but then had also called my midwife and was like, okay, you need to get on the road as well. So and I guess I feel like people don't tell you that either, that like, I didn't have any vaginal exams by anyone else. Like that was, I didn't really want any unless it was like really necessary for some reason.
Yeah,
But
yeah, of course.
yeah, like you can check yourself. I mean, you're obviously not a midwife, so, but you can
but like
tell how far away they are.
It's not like rocket science.
No, it's like how far away are they on your fingers? Like,
yeah.
kind of amazing.
And even there's like such inconsistency like with a midwife as well, because like everybody's hands are different, everybody's fingers different, everybody's like
10 centimeters is really just 10 centimeters in air quotes, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you can do your own VEs, people.
Exactly, yeah. Well, and they say that like VEs make more sense if they're like the same midwife who does them each time. So but and it was funny, like in contrast with Etta's birth. Sorry that we're jumping between the two, but
that's okay.
I also checked at some point, like probably only minutes before she was born, and she was like a really long way away still in terms of like it was quite a bit of a reach to feel her head, and I knew she was like kind of close, but I in terms of like I could feel those sensations were building, but she was nowhere near like physically close down the canal.
So did Kath and Chantel make it?
Yes, so Kath made it about the time that I jumped in the pool. I think I like ripped off all my clothes and the Depends undies. I was so glad to get rid of them. I think she made it either just before or just after I jumped in. And so it was amazing. She set up all the rest of the stuff that like Matt had been running around setting up, like basically an obstacle course in the living room, so that if I like, depending on where I wanted to be, and making sure that the everyone had food in the fridge and all that stuff. But and filling up the pool. So I jumped in, and she turned up and kind of did the rest, like clary sage and face washes and whatever. And then I think it was probably about half an hour later that Chantel turned up. And that was like a bit under an hour before she was born. So there was actually plenty of time, but probably like partly because it was the first birth, because I pushed for probably like I kind of had pushing sensations for about 2 hours in the pool, and they were all really doing stuff, like they were really working really nicely. But I think like if it had been a subsequent birth, that would have been too late. But so luckily they both made it. And I remember that feeling of like at one point looking around between a contraction and knowing that the room was full and going, oh, okay, like I can...
It's happening.
Yeah, it's happening. And I'm like, okay, everything, like all of my to-do list in terms of like the people who are meant to be here and whatnot, that's all done. I can like settle into it now. I feel really safe and... ready.
And then she was born at
9:01. So I think I jumped in the pool just before 7, maybe 6:30, and she was born at 9:01. And it's funny watching like the birth video. It's quite different to what you experience, and I just remember that like sensation of really feeling her moving down with each contraction, and then in between it being really restful, whereas like earlier in the labour it felt on kind of even in between surges, like it. So I remember that feeling quite restful in between, even though they were more intense. And she kind of moved down, she crowned, and then her head was born, and like watching the videos again, like both Chantel and Matt were like making sure I didn't lift out of the water, because I was kind of looking like I was going to lift out, and you kind of either got to be in or out. You kind of got
to you don't want to dunk them back under.
Exactly. A little tea bag dunking in and out of the water.
That's not the right thing to do. Okay. Do you remember how that felt? Like when her head was just born?
Yeah, like really intense, and I remember her turning and that feeling really weird, being like, oh my God,
so weird.
What is happening? That is so strange. And they're like, no, that's great. She's turning. Well, we didn't know she was a she, but like the baby's turning. And then Chantel got Matt to come around so he could try and catch her. And but then she started like turtling her way, like her head was kind of like bobbing up and down. And I don't remember this, so it was obviously like very minimal, but I think Chantel basically just dropped one of the little shoulders to the side, and she slipped out. She actually slipped out in the wrong direction for Matt to try and catch her. So she got her and passed her through. But
yeah.
and I just remember it being like such a relief, like that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, like wow, like so intense to like, oh wow, what is this small little human?
For in my experience, like that change is so quick. Like everything's intense and then suddenly off.
I know.
No more.
It's because like I guess because they're pressing on all of those nerve endings and then they're not, and it's just like, such relief. Like
Yeah. And so you've got your doula, Kath, and your midwife Chantel, and the second midwife somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, so she was madly calling. Oh, because it was a Saturday night, so she was madly calling everyone and anyone to try and get a second midwife, because I think they were just everyone was busy or either working or away or out or whatever. So luckily we got a second midwife who wasn't even known to my midwife at the time. I think my doula had met her before. She was really lovely, but that was the one and only time that I've seen her, so it was a bit odd, but really nice that she could turn up.
Yeah. And then it was you and Matt.
And me and Matt. Yeah.
And so what was the immediate, like after Audie was born, how, like, did you stay in the pool for long or?
So she had a short cord, so I couldn't pull her up very high. Like she kind of could only get, it was like quite tight. Like I could feel that it was quite tight. So she couldn't really get to a good position that was easy to hold. So I don't think I stayed in the water for very long. We actually we checked, and Matt was like, "It's a boy," and and my doula was like, maybe have a look again, but it was because the umbilical cord was like so tight between her legs.
Oh.
And like from where she was kind of, like how she was positioned. We're like, oh, it's a girl, oops, sorry. But because it was short, I think I got out of the pool pretty quickly and was draped in a dressing gown and, helped out of the pool and then into bed, which was just in the next room because we were set up in the spare room. And I remember from my notes that my placenta was born 24 minutes later. So pretty quickly, I just remember having that like feeling like another contraction coming along and being like, oh, something's happening. And then again, that relief of birthing the placenta. And just snuggled up in bed and, cuddled there. And then eventually at some point after they'd the midwives and doula had cleaned up and whatnot, they did some they weighed her and checked her and eventually we cut the cord and tied it off with one of the blissful herbs.
The crochet tie.
Yeah, they're so beautiful. We did the same again this time with Etta. Like they're so beautiful.
Now I feel so silly because I gave no thought to that. I was just like, my midwife will bring the clamp, but she'll clamp it, like whatever. But like now looking back, I'm like, it might have been a little bit more, not like a ritual, but also kind of a ritual. Like like it's the placenta. Maybe it deserves something better than this plastic, thing. I don't know. Like,
I mean, in the end, it's just a barrier, right? Like, it's not even. But it is. It was quite nice having. They left the clamp in case it it didn't work for whatever reason, but we didn't. We didn't need to use it. But it was actually my midwife who'd suggested them as well. So if someone doesn't suggest it to you, you just don't even know it's a possibility, right?
Yeah, exactly. And did you do anything with the placenta, or?
So it stayed in my freezer for a year and a half until we were planning to move to New Zealand, and I was like, oh no, I can't send a placenta to New Zealand. I can't keep
New Zealand.
So I have a friend who Kate Walton, who also does hypnobirthing and some fertility stuff, and I don't know if she fully offering it yet, but she used to work in like food tech, and so she dehydrated it and desiccated it for me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so that I've got it still, and then the intention is to bury it, but I might now wait till for both of them and bury both of them together.
Yeah, amazing. And so it was so good, you decided to do it again.
Exactly.
But I'm so, like, when you found out that you were pregnant with Etta, like, because obviously in Australia that whole experience would have, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, like, cost. It would have cost you lots of money.
$10,000-ish, I'd say. Like, what the
by the time you've, like, got all the things, it's really expensive.
Exactly.
So you find out you're pregnant with Etta and you're already in New Zealand, or you're going to New Zealand?
I'd accepted a job to move over here. But then we were frantically like, oh my gosh, like, what's the maternity leave like? Like, can we still afford to move? You know, there's so much went through our minds at that point of like, do we actually move? And I felt bad as well, starting a job and being like, by the way, I'm already pretty much through my first trimester pregnant. And, you know, I know that's when people often tell a job that they're pregnant, but like, I hadn't intended to be, you know, start a new job and then 6 months later go on maternity leave. So there was all that. So there's definitely a lot of, a lot of back and forth, and we kind of left it pretty late deciding in the end, but we said, no, it makes sense. And in the meantime, I reconnected with Chantel, and I was like, by the way, if I do stay in Sydney, are you good? And she's like, of course, I'd love to be a midwife again. And I was like, oh, amazing. And she was so supportive through this second pregnancy as well. Again, like, whenever I had questions, I would send a message, and just really nice to have that rapport, and I'd call it a friendship even, but you know, it's which is something I don't think you get otherwise. But I knew that New Zealand had, like, it has free maternity care there's a few caveats, like if you're Australian and you know you're staying for at least 2 years, or I'm actually lucky that Matt has New Zealand citizenship through his parents. So that means that I get the maternity perks, I guess, through that. So here it's a different system. You able to get your own, I think it's called lead maternity carer, LMC, lead midwifery. And so you can sign up to have a continuity of care through a known midwife. Went on Find Your Midwife, I think it's called, and looked up a few. It's pretty hard to tell, like, someone's vibe, you know, from the website, but I got the sense. I'd reached out to some Facebook group and said, like, you know, if someone says that they're pro home birth, are they actually pro home birth? Or, like, I was just a bit skeptical, because I guess in Australia it's, you know, they're basically a private midwife and only doing home birth, or they don't do home birth, and whereas it's not the case here, they all do a bit of everything. And I was reassured that someone says that they are positive about home birth, that they are, and the area that we're living in Queenstown is about 20% home birth, which is just wild compared to Australia. Like one in five. And also the hospital that's here is like essentially a primary hospital, so if you need anything, like even suturing of like a stage 3 or 4 tear, you need to transfer. So the same, like you can't, no cesareans, no epidurals, no like major suturing, nothing in the hospital here. So in some ways I think that like almost people go, well, like, why bother go to hospital then? I'll just have it at home. So it almost pushes that into people's minds. And you don't have to choose. Like in Australia, you have to choose where you birth first, whereas in New Zealand, you choose your midwife, and then as things progress, you figure out where feels right. And that makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
But then you and your midwife together...
because then you get the education and the information, and then you can make an informed decision. Whereas if you make it, Yeah, that makes
And,
so much
like,
more sense.
and often things, like, you often, at, 10 or 12 weeks, whenever you're booking in, like, wouldn't know whether you actually have placenta previa or pre-eclampsia or, like, some reason where it actually makes sense to transfer and go to hospital, like, for a medical reason.
So that when you want to have a home birth in New Zealand, that's like the first thing you do is you go on, or does everybody, whether you're having a hospital birth or home birth or you're not really sure, everybody does find a midwife? Or
everyone can find a midwife. I think it does depend a bit on, like, availability in your area, and there are, like, community midwives. So if you don't have, like, a lead midwife, you can have kind of like it is in Australia, where you turn up and have an appointment with, like, the midwife that's on at the time, and I think, like, if you still birth in hospital here, it's a bit more about who's on call at the time. But yeah, pretty much you're much more likely to know your midwife. And yeah, if you decide to have a home birth, then unless they're away for some reason, they really try and prioritise being there for your birth. So, there was still a chance. I mean, the same in Australia, though, even with a private midwife, like, there's a chance that your midwife is away or sick or something when your birth happens. It's just that they try their best to make it.
Well, especially in Australia, they're under so much pressure because
exactly.
There's not just one next door, like,
No, exactly. Depending where you live, right? They can be really hard.
Yeah. So how did the care, I guess, antenatally compare, with Etta and New Zealand compared to Audie and Australia, do you think?
Yeah. In Australia, Chantel came to me. So her business name is Midwife to Mother, so she travels to the mothers. So and she came to me, and we'd have cups of tea, and we'd have, an hour-long appointment. Whereas here I was going in to the clinic for the appointments. So I guess that's one subtle difference, that it feels like a little bit more medical in terms of that. And that's probably just that they have a higher caseload in some ways that they have to manage, because not all of their clients home birth or even birth in this town. Like, some of them travel, so they have a bit of a higher caseload, I think. Though Jess, who was my midwife here, came to me towards the end. So I guess that's one difference. It's free. Like, even ultrasounds, I think I paid like $20 or $40 in total for ultrasounds. Like, I think I might have paid for the first one, and then that was it. So there were.
Do you have to have private health in New Zealand?
No, like, it doesn't. You don't need it for any maternity cover. I think you can choose to have it, and if you had an obstetrician, maybe it would make more sense as well. But But also, like, obstetricians can be part of the the journey as well, and that happened with me. I had a scan. I had a scan because my placenta had marginal insertion and a succenturiate lobe, which just means like a little accessory lobe off the side. Yeah. So I had a later pregnancy ultrasound at like 30 something weeks. And found out that Etta was breech, and so then got referred into the obstetricians through the system, and all of that's taken care of. Though if you wanted to choose that obstetrician as your private obstetrician, then you'd pay, and I'm assuming that private insurance would help cover some of that.
Yeah, so you found out Etta was breech at 30-ish.
Yeah, 32 or something weeks, which was a bit of a surprise, but made a bit of sense in hindsight, because she felt like she was taking up more room. I just remember like it feeling quite, like the bump feeling much more uncomfortable, and the kicks in different positions, and just feeling like it was quite different this time. So as I do, I went into a real research dive at that point and was like, all right, what does breech birth mean? You know, like what are all the odds?
Are they allowed to do home birth breaches in New Zealand, or known breaches in New Zealand?
I don't think it's as strict as the rules in Australia, where if it's a known breach in Australia, they are really they're meant to transfer to a hospital if you've got time, obviously, and that kind of thing. I think it's not quite so strict, though. It's like all risk based, and basically the obstetrician's advice was, you know, you'd be fine. You've given birth before. You had a purely physiological birth the first time, but my advice is to go to hospital and just tell everyone to keep their hands off and have a vaginal breech birth in hospital. In terms of midwives, I think that, you know, I mean, it's a bit hard here as well because the nearest town, like the nearest major centres are a few hours drive, and so they kind of want to call things a bit earlier. You know, if they think they need assistance, they want to call it a bit earlier. So it's, not as black and white as in Australia, but I think the same kind of idea of, you know, it is in theory slightly higher risk. I don't think that's, from what I looked at, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think the higher risk is that providers don't know how to breech. They don't feel comfortable resolving complexities that can happen in breech like they do in a head down birth. I think that's the risk. I think, honestly. So that was where my head. That's kind of where I came around to being like, I'd be fine to have a home birth, a breech home birth. There was Stu Fisher. I don't know what his organisation is. He does a podcast, and I think he also was on the Great Birth Rebellion. About breech birth. I know Dr. Bissett's was on Great Birth Rebellion. I can't remember what other podcast he was in, and he talked about mole tips, and he's this obstetrician that works in, well, he doesn't do births anymore, but he used to do home births in the States, I think in California, and he pretty much did breech and twins because they're really the only home birth that people need an obstetrician to go to. And he said in his whole time he'd never had a mole tip, breech, vaginal birth that needed a cesarean. So like some probably had still transferred to hospital, you know, thinking that things might have been a little funny or a funny position. But that gave me a lot of confidence. And even for first time vaginal breech births at home, I think he said it was around like 20% cesarean, which is much lower than a typical cesarean rate for a hospital anyway. So it's like, so I was pretty like comforted by that, and had like kind of done all the research. And then I also spoke to Chantel and Kath, like previous midwife and doula, as well as Jess, my current midwife. But knowing that Jess, you know, had a bit of, like I said, those risk factors that she had to manage. And Chantel and Kath were both like, look, you know all the stats, you know how your birth went. If anyone was going to have a breech vaginal birth at home, like, you know, we'd put our faith in you. You kind of just got to think about what feels right for you. So yeah.
And so did Etta turn?
Yeah, she did.
Because a lot of breech babies, they're moving. They can do a lot of things.
I know, and especially with subsequent pregnancies, you got more space. And I also think in some ways because I'd done that like mental work of going, all right, I'm ready for anything. I don't know. In some ways it just maybe like I didn't need for her to be that way anymore. I don't know, because I reached out to Call for and Restore, what's her name, B, and said have you, I can't remember what the question was, but about her being breech, and she said sometimes there's an emotional reason why they're staying closer to your heart. And I was like, oh my God, isn't that sweet?
That's so beautiful.
So beautiful. And so then I think in some ways, like me doing all that work of being like, she's fine. Like everything's fine. I know it's fine. She did flip and, she was born head down. So it's a total, again, like I said before, like just a pretty normal, boring birth.
And so apart from that, did you, so the whole rhesus negative thing that happened with Audie, how did that impact in the pregnancy with Etta, or?
No, I did have anti-D after Audie's birth. They did I can't remember the name of it, Kleihauer test or whatever it's called, and it was fine. But I did have NTD after her, so that mitigates the risk, or mitigated most of the risk for having any complications. And I had NTD again the same after Etta, kind of just in case. But again, like what didn't indicate that there was any transfer of blood between us. So that was fine.
Yeah. And like hypertension / possible pre-eclampsia wise, like did anything come up or
no? And one of the reasons why I was particularly worried about it was because it did happen with my mum, that her blood pressure went up for all three of us towards the end. With Audie, it did slightly postpartum, but not to a worrying level. And then, nothing with Etta, even though I had a high risk again of it. But knowing that it hadn't happened the first time also kind of helped settle my nerves a bit for that.
Yeah. And like, pre-eclampsia, when it's there, that's pretty scary.
Oh yeah.
Serious. Yeah, it's like pretty serious.
Yeah.
And I guess the fear mongering about breach and stuff. Did you have any fears like that you had to put like significant energy into, I guess, to overcoming in either pregnancies?
In the first one, I would say that, we didn't really tell people we were having a home birth. And that was like a bit of a protective mechanism. I guess I was more worried about like preeclampsia, and had done a lot of reading around like induction for that and that idea. But was quite glad that hadn't resulted. But you know what, like that's why the medical system does exist. Like we're so lucky that it is there for those things if and when they do become available. So I was like quite happy to plan a home birth and know that if I needed more medical intervention, I was quite happy for that. Second time around, I was like definitely less worried about all of those things, but I was like much, much more planned about if things didn't go to plan, if that makes sense. Like I really worked through, like I did my birth map. And I like went, okay, if I need to transfer for this reason, if I need to transfer for this reason, and here if you transfer in pregnancy, in some ways it's a bit easier because you have to transfer by helicopter predominantly. And if you're pregnant, it's you and baby go. But if you have to transfer postpartum, it may be you or baby because they don't have space for both. And so that's quite hard on people, like the other, either the baby and partner or family or whoever goes in the car, or the mum goes in the car separate, which, I think this time I was like much, much more aware of like the possibility of transferring and what all of those different scenarios meant. And in a way, like, again, doing all of that releases a lot of the fear of it could happen, but at least you've thought about all of the scenarios. The most worrying thing was like, what do I do with my 2-year-old? Especially with the transfer. Like, what do you do? Because we have Matt's parents here, but they went away until like I was like 38 weeks pregnant. Like 4 weeks. We just moved here, so we didn't know too many people. Thankfully we didn't need to.
And so when was Etta born? How many weeks was Etta?
So Etta was 39 and 5, and so a week longer. I was pregnant a week longer than Audie, but they were both born 2 days before the full moon, which I think.
Oh wow!
I just feel like there's like my own internal clock.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing. And in terms of like differences with birth, like, would you say that they were similar, or were there big differences, or how would you?
I think they're similar I think they seem similar, kind of possibly on paper, but they felt quite different.
Of course, because you said you thought Audie was probably posterior.
Yeah, and her, like, and the waters with her broke first. My waters broke first with her, whereas with Etta, they were the third last contraction to break.
Yeah.
So like she had much more cushioning around her, and I think that probably helped. And yeah, I laboured like more in like upright and in the kitchen, kind of leaning over the kitchen bench. Whereas last time I was like more like kind of in a triangle on the bed with butt up. Yeah. Quite different. Both times I used the TENS. I found that really helpful, and hypnosis tracks, like the Hypnobirthing Australia / Hypnobubs tracks. So pretty similar. I think I was like, didn't need as many like external inputs the second time around. Like the TENS machine was probably the most helpful, and then getting in the water was similar. But yeah, didn't kind of need as much. Like knew what was going to happen, and things ramped up. But they ramped up a bit quicker second time around. Yeah.
So was your whatever you consider labour, was it shorter or longer with Etta?
It was shorter. Like the day before, I went and picked up Audie from daycare at probably about 4 o'clock, and I started having some contractions, which I realised in hindsight because I'd also again had lots of Braxton Hicks, and so couldn't really tell whether it was like we're on or is this just practice. But that afternoon when I picked her up, I came home and had a nap because I was like, I'm just going to get as much sleep in as I can.
Yeah, absolutely.
I went to bed early as well because I just was like, I just have this suspicion that these are like for real. And I also had in my mind that the next day was 2 days before the full moon, and that's when Audie was born. So I like kind of had in my mind like, oh, this might be when things happen. And so, like had contractions overnight, but they didn't kind of really bother me, I guess. And then at 6 a.m. I remember like feeling like, oh, I can't really sleep through these now, and got up and I made some muffins to keep myself occupied. And
as you do. Yeah. Girls got to eat, so like.
And the house not great.
Yeah. Aromatherapy, cake style.
Exactly. And Audie hadn't had a good sleep. Like I'm not sure if she maybe knew. But she hadn't had a good sleep, so her and Matt slept in till about 8 or 8:30. And then they got up and we called his mum to take her to daycare because like she woke up and we had breakfast together, and I was like, oh, toddler energy is pretty intense when you're in labour. Having to really focus in on these contractions, and then like, 2-year-olds don't understand. I was like, oh gosh, I think she's got to go to daycare. Like, even though I'd really wanted her there, and that's still kind of one of my regrets. But I'm not sure how we could have done it another way. It's just so intense. And again, Matt was running around setting up the birth pool and running kettles full of hot
water.
Yeah, hot water back and forth from the kitchen. So he was pretty busy.
Yeah. And so did you give birth during the day with Etta?
Yeah, so same thing again. I kept all the curtains down and I was like, oh, natural light, I do not like you.
Yeah.
And she was born at midday. So not that long. So much shorter labour, but still not super short. Neither of them were.
Yeah. And did you have some nice time there whilst Audie was at daycare, or did you like bring Audie home, or what did you do?
Yeah, no, she stayed at daycare. She went to daycare probably. She probably left about 9 or 9:30, so a bit later than normal. And then that kind of like everyone started coming in at that point, like my midwife, the on-call midwife, Heidi, and there's a student midwife, Pip, who was also there. Cool. And I also had decided from the first one that I wanted a birth photographer.
Amazing, yep.
Yeah, so my birth photographer, Wendy, had made the trip over from Wanaka, and so she was there, and I remember being in the pool at one point and being like, it's a real party happening here. Like, it's a real party vibe for me just to hang out in the bath.
And everybody's watching me.
Everyone's watching, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and got in the pool. It was a bit cool at first, but Matt was running water back and forth,
Yeah.
and warming it up. And then it got to a really nice temperature, and I kind of had that pushing sensation again. And I'd probably had it a little bit earlier, same as last time, but I had like almost consciously decided not to let it take over, if that makes sense, and just kind of breathe through it and let it build with a few more contractions. And so it kind of felt different this time. I felt much more like I was working with the energy that my body was giving me, and less like I had to do stuff, which was a bit more the first time, which possibly was again like positioning and stuff like that. But I felt a bit more productive. And then so I don't feel like I can't actually remember, but I don't think I was like kind of actually pushing for very long or having that like real pushing sensation. I'd say it was like only like 5 or 6 contractions where I was like really feeling that reverse vomiting, like that feel like needed to push. And so it was like third last contraction, my waters broke, and my midwife was like, I think that pop was your waters. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. And I checked myself just before that, and she seemed like really far away.
Yeah.
And then second to last contraction, her head was like crowning, and she was just there. And I was like, and then in between I was just breathing like, hold her here. And again, I didn't know it was a she, but I just like had this, I just was like, really using my breath in this like low tone to just be like, just hold her, just wait for the energy to build up again. Yeah. And then she just kind of slipped out. The next contraction.
And you were in the pool again?
And I was in the pool again. This time I'd set it up even like less rush, so there was so many fairy lights. And
that's
so many
beautiful.
Like photos and
Yeah. And what was the cord length like for Etta? Was it also relatively short?
It was also short, and I think that's possibly another reason why she'd been breached for a while, like with a short cord, like she probably just didn't have heaps of space, and that felt right at the time. But also a short cord, and like when I pulled her out, she, like gurgled a little bit. I was like, oh gosh, like you're in the water, like already already like, trying to manhandle you. So I got out of the pool really quickly with her because there wasn't a seat on this pool. It was like an old school kind of pool. And so it was much harder to keep her out of the water with the short cord. So I got out quite quickly and got in bed, and and her placenta, so Audie's placenta was 24 minutes, but I just watched the videos and hers was 15 minutes, so I was like even quicker. And I remember absolutely like such a relief again. Like the video of me is like, I'm just like, oh, that feels so good.
Yeah. Well, it's quite usually like a decent size
with
an organ. So
exactly.
Like it's and then how long did you keep it attached to Etta for?
I can't actually remember. We waited. Like it had stopped pulsing. It would have probably been an hour. Like, I
guess like with home birth, like there's no like unless it's like indicated somehow. Like there's no rush. Like it's just.
If everything's going smoothly post birth, then there's no real reason to.
Like it's not a priority to clamp or cut the cord for most things really. Wow. I love the names Etta and Audie. They're very cool names.
They're pretty cute. That kind of old school.
Wow. And like, how would you, do you have any like words to describe like the differences in the care that you receive in New Zealand to Australia, or do you feel like it's much of a much-ness, or
I think
do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Australia could really do with some like a similar idea in that, like, kind of give that power back to midwives in that, like it should all be midwifery led, really, pregnancy and birth, and obstetricians. absolutely have a place, but that place should be kind of the pathology of birth, of like, you know, if and when things, when their expertise is needed, and they are absolute experts. But otherwise, if everything is normal and in the normal course of birth, like, so I think that was one thing that was really nice to have experienced. And yeah, both midwives like Chantel and Jess, I feel like I'm, you know, have built up like a really lovely rapport with both of them, and it's just this amazing thing that, I got to know, you know, them, and they got to know us and our family, and so I think that's a shame that Australia doesn't have that. So yeah, that felt really nice. I think it's quite interesting. That if on paper that a birth could feel this or look the same, but that what happens in your own head is quite different as well. And I remember having this thought in Etta's birth, thinking when things were really like ramping up, I was like, oh, if I had any trauma around birth, like I can really understand how it would mess with you, because this is so intense. Like I just remember having this empathy for anyone that kind of has had any trauma around birth or anything related, that it is like such a big ask on you emotionally and physically.
Well, it's like such a, I think, other people have said this as well, and myself included, that it is also very internal. Like you can be externalizing things, but only you are in your mind. Like
absolutely.
And, you know, the hormones, play their role in that as well. But yeah, like if you have fears and things, you really do need to work on overcoming those, or putting in place ways to feel supported to address any potential that comes up. Because like when you're pushing it and you're scared, and it's like, it's,
and only you can give birth. Like everyone else can be there to support you in
you could have 100 people,
but or no
it's
people.
you that's doing it.
Exactly. In the end, it has to be you and baby. That's all. That's the only people working at it. I think one thing that I with my philosophy, I guess the first time around in terms of having a home birth, once I decided that's what I was doing, my thought was, your first birth isn't a draft. Like you may never give birth again, and if that's a place that feels right for you, and you hear so many people saying like, oh, I thought about having a home birth the first time, but I just wasn't sure. I didn't want to risk it, or my partner didn't support it, or like so many reasons why people don't have a home birth the first time. And I think, like, what if you never give birth again? Like it's not a draft. Like it's like such an important life, event that I think it's worth choosing what feels right.
And like you've said, like the pregnancy or the birth like can be completely different. So like you could give birth in a hospital and be like, oh, I could have done this at home, and then like you could in theory go second time to give birth at home and be like, oh, well, actually I need medical support. Like there's not really like a rhyme or reason.
No,
like,
every pregnancy is so different.
Yeah, but I guess at a base level, birth is something that women have been doing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
And most people shouldn't or don't really need the level of interventions that's occurring in our birth culture. That it's, you're quite right. Like obstetricians and the medical system, like they have their place for sure. Like we've said, pre-eclampsia, you don't want to be messing around with pre-eclampsia.
Yeah, exactly.
But, you had a risk of pre-eclampsia, but you didn't develop pre-eclampsia. But, like, if you did, there was, like, an option put in place that could, keep you and your baby safe. Like,
yeah. And I think, like, honestly, if you like, because there's so, because our technology has evolved, like, you could have a risk of so many things, there's, like, you basically, I think there's I think it was on the Great Birth Rebellion, they were saying like something like 80 or 90% of people, I don't know if this stat is correct, but it was like really high proportion are in theory high risk. But risk is just like, it's background noise, you know, it's like it may not result. And
also the way
thing to take into account.
Yeah, like the way risk is presented as well. Like they might say, oh, like it doubles your risk of X, Y, Z. But that risk might be going from like 0.02 to 0.04. So like it is doubling, but like
yeah, exactly. What's the
0.04 is still really low.
Yeah, exactly. And what are you comfortable with versus
exactly. And what are you as an individual comfortable with? Because we all take risks every single day. Yeah.
Jumping in the car, we're taking a risk.
Yeah. Walking out the door, going up the stairs. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so so much for talking to me, Meredith.
Thank you.
You're like 3 hours ahead, right? I think that's what we figured out.
Yeah.
So it's like lunchtime, over past lunchtime there for you.
Yeah.
And I presume that Etta fell asleep.
Yeah, she was asleep.
Yeah.
The majority of that, thankfully.
Amazing. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for hosting this. It's so nice to have a space for people to listen to birth stories about home birth and free birth. It's just, so wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks.